Good evening. All right, welcome to Phenix City, Alabama and Cattahoochee Valley Community College, as we affectionately refer to the college, CVCC. I am Glenn Cannon, the president of the college since July of last year, so technically I'm still a freshman. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce one of our distinguished faculty members. Dr. Bryan McClanahan has been at the college since 2005 as a faculty member in the Social Sciences Division. He received his bachelor in history at Salisbury University in Maryland and his master's and PhD in history from the University of South Carolina. And if you've been around him for any length of time, you'll soon find out he's an avid Gamecock fan. Dr. McClanahan has been a member of the faculty at CVCC since 2005, as I said, and previously taught history at Jefferson Davis Community College. Now, some do not associate the community college with the scholarly production of writing and research, but Dr. McClanahan proves the addition to the academic discussion of history and events is alive and well in the community college. This book is his third to be published, and he has appeared on local and syndicated programs in support of those works. In addition, he has written and published opinion pieces on current events from a historical perspective. While doing all that, he and his wife Samantha have found time to raise a family. They have a son and three daughters, so I know they're very busy. So we need to get on with the reason we're here tonight. And so I'm pleased to introduce the author of the Founding Fathers' Guide to the Constitution, Dr. Bryan McClanahan.
All right, how y'all doing? Great. Well, thanks for coming. I do appreciate it. It's good to see a bunch of my students here, and of course also friends from the community and faculty, and your support is welcome. I'd also like to thank, of course, Cattahoochee Valley Community College for letting me do this here, and also Dr. Cannon, Kelly Williams, and Karen Kelly, and all the people that helped me put this together, and of course also C-SPAN, who's here tonight covering the event. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't thank my family, who unfortunately could not make it tonight, for giving me the support to do this. Also, the support to write my other books and have time to do those things when there didn't seem to be much time to do anything. So they are, of course, the backbone in all of this. Now, before I start, I'd like to tell each one of my students here that actually this book is dedicated to you. It's dedicated to my children and dedicated to you, for the reason being that every semester at CVCC, I teach the Constitution. And as you all are aware, when I do that, I ask a question: how many of you have ever read the Constitution? And of course, usually one hand goes up, maybe two, sometimes none. And so every semester I'm confronted with the fact that I go into a blank slate. And it's unfortunate, because the Constitution, of course, is the governing document for the United States. And we often hear about the Constitution and what it means, but there really isn't much information out there, it seems, in the American public about it. And that's a relatively recent phenomenon, because it used to be people talked about the Constitution quite a lot. Whether it was in Congress, when they actually debated if the bill in question was constitutional or not, whether it was in the public, through public discourse, through commentaries on the Constitution. This was a big topic for many years in the United States, but not so much anymore. And oftentimes you hear that the Constitution is too old, it's archaic. Well, the last time I checked, it wasn't written in Old English. It's not Shakespearean. There's no thous and thees in it. And so it's easy to understand if you just sit down and read it, but most people don't take the time. And I think it's because they're scared, or they don't really know what it means. They look at the document and they say, okay, well, here's Article 1, here's Article 2, here's Article 3. What do those things actually mean? So my job in writing this book was to actually give people a readable story of the Constitution. And not just that, I went through clause by clause and I broke it out so that students of the Constitution, whether they're at CVCC or whether they're in California or Maine or Hawaii or Washington, D.C. or across the country, would know what it meant to read the Constitution and what the founding generation said this Constitution meant. And I also was motivated to write the book because of the charge in the Constitution itself. The founding generation left this Constitution to their posterity. And that's often a word we don't use, but that's to us. And we have a sacred trust to know what that Constitution means, to understand it, to read it, to digest it. And so again, by doing this, I hoped the American people would do that if they were students of the Constitution. Now, oftentimes you hear different ideas about the Constitution. Well, some will say the Constitution's an elastic document. You can read into it. It's stretchable. It has words, and you can read these words, but we have to go beyond that because that's what this Supreme Court judge or this constitutional scholar says it means. And then you have those that say the Constitution is a limiting document. The Constitution is what it says. You can't go beyond that. And so we should interpret the Constitution literally. And there's this big debate, and people get confused by this stuff. Well, which one is it? Is it a loosely interpreted document? Is it an elastic document? Or is it a limiting document? And so I actually thought to cut through all of that. I really didn't care what modern scholars have said about the Constitution, to be honest with you. I really didn't care what the Supreme Court has said about the Constitution. I cared what the Founding Fathers had said about the Constitution. And so my journey began there. And in fact, when I originally conceptualized this book, when I pitched it to begin with, and those of you that don't know the publishing process, you often pitch an idea, and then you're told yes or no. And if you're told yes, then you go from there. So when I pitched the idea, I was going to focus almost primarily on the opponents of the Constitution, and I'll talk about some of these terms in a minute, but I was going to focus on what they thought about the Constitution, and the publisher came back and said, no, that wouldn't be good, because it might turn out to look like an anti-Constitution book. So I said, okay, well, how can we work with this? And so we brainstormed a little bit, and we decided we would write a book on the Constitution based on what the founding generation said about the Constitution, both for the Constitution and against the Constitution. Now, I had read a lot of material about this, but as I started digging through the mountains of research that's out there on this subject, I realized I'd only scratched the surface. And much of what I knew was going to be changed, or at least in some ways, what I thought I knew about it was only going to be more involved. Because as I got into the material, I said, my gosh, this is deeper than I thought. What I'd often thought about the Constitution is there, but there's so much more to it. It's much more complex than even what I had said about the Constitution in my first book. And of course, when you're looking at this document, and I say it's a Founding Fathers Guide to the Constitution because that's what it is, and it's not just the Founding Fathers that you're familiar with, and I'll talk about them in a minute, but it's all the founding generation. This is a generational book for the American generation. It's not just 1, 2, 3 people or 4 people and what they said. I went and looked at what everyone said about it that I could put my hands on, and public documents, because again, this thing had to be sold to people, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the Founding Fathers are important because they wrote it. And so I thought, what source would be better than going to the people who wrote the document itself and who actually had to present this thing to 13, sometimes hostile ratifying conventions and tell people this is what it means. And they had to go to the press and say, well, this is what you might be saying the Constitution will do X, Y, and Z, but no, be reassured, it's not going to do that. This is actually what it means. And so that's the Constitution that we should be looking at. That is the Founding Fathers' Constitution. That is the Constitution, as I say in the book over and over again, as ratified. And that process is very important. Again, that whole ratification process, the Constitution meant nothing until the states decided to ratify it. So that's the overall subject of the book. And I'm going to read you a quote in a few minutes from a founding father of North Carolina. And I'll refer back to that quote quite a bit. But oftentimes, you'll get this statement, well, the Founding Fathers were just a combative group of people. They didn't agree on anything. And what founders are you talking about? We all know some of the big names, or maybe you know some of the big names, but you probably heard of Alexander Hamilton. You probably heard of James Madison and John Jay. They're the authors of the Federalist Papers, the 85 essays in defense of the Constitution. And so most people that read the Constitution and think that they understand the Constitution